very much for giving me this opportunity to get share the perspective we have at Ubiqube of what's happening in the industry and the whole virtualization trend hitting the networking space. Ubiqube is an orchestration software vendor. We're headquartered in Europe, and we've been around for a number of years now. We cater mainly to the telecom service providers. So I'll tell you more in a few minutes, but basically that's where we play.
Got it. Okay. So yeah, obviously you guys have a deal with recently with Orange, working with them on some of their virtualization plans. I guess maybe provide a little insight on kind of what you did with them, maybe what they were looking for, what you guys are able to provide, maybe some challenges. I mean, obviously virtualization is a big move for operators. They're all getting involved in it pretty heavily, but what you saw there.
Right. Yeah. So Orange is I said we cater primarily to the telecom service provider community. And let me subdivide that community in two type of players. The first type is the one we actually started originally with by helping them solve the issue of how do they roll out managed services in a multi-vendor environment. This is before even virtualization came into the picture and SDN and NFV. And that was our stepping stone in the industry as an orchestration vendor. And we garnered a lot of know-how and expertise around, managed security services, managed edge services, and so on and so forth. And as IT and telecom converged and most service providers were trying to provide more value-added service to the enterprise community, we started to see a lot more momentum there. And the problem for them was, I have too many vendors that I'm dealing with. They are very different. They provide different services. How can you help me stitch all these together, glue them together, and make it a single pane of glass service experience? The reason I'm highlighting that first group of players that we started with is because I'm going to segue now to virtualization and what we did with Orange, because it actually makes sense. It's important to understand the DNA of the company and where we came from, and how what we learned from that experience helps actually making the transition to virtualization and helps to make this value proposition more compelling for those guys trying to roll out services based on virtualized technologies. So the second group of players, the ones we're talking about here, are the early adopters of the next gen stuff in networking, and that NFV is one of those next gen stuff. And in that group of players, what we're primarily seeing right now is early field trials. That's what we're seeing right now. And Orange is one of the prominent ones. So what is it Orange was trying to achieve here? Just a little intro here on how we view the networking industry transitioning to virtualized technologies. There has been a lot of hype around SDN, a year and a half, 2 years ago. The drill. Some even call it the bubble. There's a lot of good stuff in there, but the fact is, I'm a telco head. So what I see is, look, this looks great in the data center, but if you're trying to take over the world of networks, that's not going to happen overnight, right? And so then, the second wave of innovation along those lines was actually NFV, and it started to get a lot of momentum and attention about, say, a year ago, right? And so now, after a year of attention, a year of people looking into it, we're starting to see the first trials and field trials. And NFV, or network functional virtualization, there are two. The term is very generic, and there are a number of use cases, because you could, theoretically, you could virtualize anything, right? You could take it that way and say, okay, there are two. It's going to be like SDN. It's going to be a monster wave, and it's going to take over the entire. That's not going to really happen. Here again, there's hype and there's reality. The reality is there are some use cases that make sense for telcos right now, not tomorrow, not in 5 years. Now they're ready to move now. And one of those sweet use cases, very pragmatic ones, is the one around virtual CPE. So as you know, there's tons of use cases where you could use NFV-based architectures, but virtual CPE is a very compelling one, I think, and because it's maybe the lowest hanging fruit from a telecom service provider point of view, and the less disruptive one, because just look at the RFPs that you have in the CPE space at the edge of the network. That's where you have very frequently RFPs to reshuffle the cards and change vendors to optimize your cost structure, provide a new service through a new box to your edge customers, and so on and so forth. So realistically, that space in the networking business has always been one with high cycles of innovation in reality. When as you go more to the metro, to the core, things are there's a little bit more inertia, right? So they will happen, but it's going to take a little bit more time. So Orange is one of those early adopters rolling out field trials around what I call virtual CPE. And specifically what Orange launched, and that's why it's a very interesting use case and it's a very interesting trial, is they took it beyond just testing. I'm really talking here about a field trial. They're targeting the SMB market in France. And they wanted to bundle together and demonstrate that they could, A, bundle together a number of features coming from a number of vendors and stitch them together on the fly. B, demonstrate that they could provide the SMB customer, in the large sense of the term SMB here, they could provide the SMB customer with a service experience that would be similar to what you would have in an IT cloud environment, whereby, you're trying to buy something out of an Amazon or Equinix or equivalent. Well, that portal-based user experience where you're, setting up your virtual machine or consuming XYZ capability provided by the cloud provider, they wanted to demonstrate that from a network point of view or a security point of view, security service point of view, they could provide the same user experience. And that was a challenge. Now, the idea is, how do you glue all the components together? How do you make sure that maybe the cheap box they're deploying in the SMB side combined with that firewall that they're virtualizing combined? How do you make all these work together, stitch them together, and then make that something that you can consume over a portal? That's exactly where we play.
Got it. Okay. Well, you mentioned a bunch of topics that I think are really important to the space. And obviously, with this Orange deal, it's kind of going after their enterprise market, basically. And that seems like that's what a lot of people are targeting initially with this, is because it does seem like the enterprise customer obviously is an important customer, but it seems like they're perhaps the most familiar with this type of purchasing and working with data centers and stuff like that. So it does seem like that's kind of the target, at least initially. A lot of these POCs out there seem to be going towards this market.
Oh yeah, I'd say, honestly, I think 90% of them is targeting that market. Absolutely, you're absolutely right. That's where it's going to start. Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. Because again, I think pragmatically, NFV is not the thrust for NFV to happen, or let's call it generically, let's put it virtualization to happen in the networking environment. I think the thrust is not an architectural play. It is true when you read the press, when you read the hype, you feel that, new architectural paradigm. That's what's, like people wake up in the morning sitting in a temple and say, today we're going to change the architecture. Why? Well, what's the drive for that? I think the thrust is fundamentally the appetite that those telcos have to provide more services, more value-added services, I should say, at a more cost-effective price point to the enterprise market, which is, bear in mind, the market, I believe, that has the money right now, because most of those telcos have saturated penetration in consumer. For Christ's sake, how much more can you take out of the average Joe in terms of monthly fee for TV channels, right? That's it. So the El Dorado is enterprise. You're absolutely right. I don't think it's an architectural play. I think it's cost optimization, but expanded services play. And one of the services suite that those guys are looking at adding is clearly the security suite, because there's a reason why Orange has, in this particular offering, has a firewalling capability, right? Because security is appealing to the enterprise market. It speaks volumes. They understand that. They know it's important, and they know they cannot manage it. So they're ready to entrust a third party to do it for them. Granted, that third party has the credibility and so on and so forth. And the big names like Orange, we also announced recently NTT. Those kind of big names would have the credibility to provide those kind of services. So yes, I'm with you.
Yeah. Okay. Obviously, these operators, like you mentioned, Docomo's involved in this. AT&T's announced a lot here domestically. Orange, SK Telecom. A lot of these operators, Telefonica, for instance, too. It seems like a lot of these operators, it's nice to kind of get. It seems like for the vendor community, at least, it's nice to get this kind of support from the operators on this, because a lot of times in the past, in the telecom space, it was the vendors driving a lot of this and hoping that the operators would come on board. It seems like with virtualization, it's almost a carrier-driven initiative. I mean, it seems like operators want this, and they're kind of going out to the vendor community and saying, hey, this is what we're looking for. What can you do for us? It's got to be good for, at least for a vendor perspective, to have those operators really pushing this from their side and bringing you guys on board. And, it's obviously a good market for you guys going forward.
Oh, absolutely. I'm fully with you on this one. I think SDN has been very much pushed. NFV is being pulled.
Okay.
Which is better. Okay. But again, devil's in details. Not everything NFV is going to happen short term. That's what I am seeing. And I personally, because of the nature of our company, which is as I said, we're European based. We have presence in the US. We have global presence sales wise. But fundamentally, we came at it. We're not the typical Silicon Valley type startup, right? So we have to be extremely pragmatic in terms of where we invest our energy. And we invest our energy where we see real appetite driven by a real business driver. So our filter is sort of different versus if I had been funded heavily and based out of Cupertino, maybe my agenda would be different and my reading of the landscape would be different. So because I have this, DNA background, it focuses us immediately on where the business drivers are. And again, in NFV, not everything is going to happen short term, but the one we're talking about, this one, money is being spent right now because they're going to be making money with it short term.
Yeah, interesting. And that seems like that's a challenge too, because it is the business model on this is still somewhat, I think, for some operators, a little shaky. There are some business use cases where it does make sense, like you said, but it does seem like still I guess at the network level that they're trying to explain to their their CIOs or whatever, or CTOs or CFOs, what the business case is for this, because it does seem like, at least initially, there might not be an immediate return. But obviously, looking longer term, it seems like the financial benefit of this, of going towards virtualization, there seems like a more solid model going forward. So it does seem like, at least from the operators, if they can get a good model initially on this making sense for them financially, it's probably a much easier argument for them to kind of move it up the chain to get approval. Absolutely.
You're making a fantastic point. I mean, there's a difference, even inside a telco, there's a difference between selling to your top management a project on the basis of it impacting your cost structure. If you want to sell on the basis of, I have something that disruptive cost-wise in terms of what it's going to cost us to provide service, well, first of all, let's be real here. I mean, those guys have huge workforce. So anything you claim is going to be disruptive, nothing is disruptive in the telecom world, because those guys are not going to fire 10,000 people just because, virtualization kicked in. So anybody selling on this basis, I mean, he's, in my opinion, smoking pipe, because it doesn't make any sense, right? The inertia is so big that those guys will take forever. The things that we see, the projects that stick and that really happen short term, are the ones where internally the sale is made on the fact that, hey, if we have this, we could be selling more services, we could be broadening our service portfolio short term, right now. That's the one that's going to get momentum, I think. And that's the one that's going to basically, those are the type of projects that are going to basically break the ice and pave the way for, indeed, the future architectural revamp that will ultimately happen. But it has to start somewhere. And you're absolutely right. I mean, back to the enterprise space, clearly take the case of Orange. If you look at the edge of the network and you look at all those services they can provide, and you look at it with, and your mindset is, hey, I want to be the killer app or the killer service provider, in the sense that I want to be the one that provides the best customer experience. Well, if you put that focus on, and if the technologies we're looking at right now helps that telco provide a better customer experience, then that's a winning use case. That's a use case that will stick, and that's the use case that will get budget, and that's the use case that they will spend money on, and they will put their, and guess what? That's actually a use case that's not going to be disruptive from an HR point of view. Very, very little so, because it's not sold on cost reduction. That's not the driver. Ultimately, there will be cost reduction, but it's not the main driver. The last point I'd like to make on the cost reduction piece, there are two ways to look at it. either you look at it from a vendor selling, slideware and a vision, and hey, virtualization cost reduction. Beautiful. You're going to cut your workforce by 50%. Okay. Because my technology is so, well, that's one way to view things, but I don't think those large telcos will start running just because of that pitch. On the other hand, if structurally you change the name of the game in that industry is a technology-driven industry, right? So the service providers consume technology that they put together, they assemble that technology, and then they sell it like a service to an enterprise community. So they have two cost components. There's the technology cost component, and there's their HR cost component. Any vendor who's pitching on, you're going to reduce your HR and your OpEx, everybody says yes. Nobody does anything. But if, on the other hand, you're selling on, hey, but guess what? Your vendor cost portion of your cost structure will dramatically drop. Why is that? Well, because you're going to keep everybody honest. Because here's the beauty about NFV. NFV, like the case of Orange where they have virtual CP, enables them to slice and dice and pick and choose for every function, the best of breed and the best price, and then stitch them together. If they can do that, if they reach that level of flexibility and freedom in assembling technology, well, then ultimately what's going to happen, they will have a bigger bargaining power, and certain price points that are commanded by certain vendors will be dropped. So ultimately, they will experience price reduction, but it's not the one we're thinking of.
Yeah, understood. Well, I guess that brings up another point then, because it does seem like that the integration issues of virtualization is still, perhaps we're still in the early stages, because obviously, like you said, I mean, these are a lot of vendors who are all going to have to at some point agree on a standard that allows an operator to slice and dice what they want. I mean, to be able to do that, these things have to interoperate to an extent. I mean, you have to there has to be a level somewhere where the platform is interoperable across all the vendors. And I guess where are we in that process of getting everybody from the vendor community on the same page to make this all work?
Music to my ears. I mean, I love this interview. So finally, let me tell you about what we're doing here in this company.
Okay.
So here's the drill. So absolutely, you're absolutely right. The trick here to keep everybody honest and to give that telco the ability to assemble it whoever he wants over time is integration. Okay. And then the natural question, you brought it up, is okay, but integration is hard. Guess what? That's why we have the OSS industry, and that's why we have multi-billion-dollar OSS vendors, right? And we have had them for years. So okay, there two are doing good, so I think things are going to change for them too. So, but the national inclination or the national thought is, okay, but if you start slicing and dicing and you have to integrate all those two players, then you'd have to have a world where everybody has the same religion, same language, and so that you can integrate them together. And it's a good point, because that's the culture in our industry. So, we go down the path of SNMP, or we go down the path of XYZ protocol or frame of thought for the technology we're trying to integrate. Well, here's what we designed. Our approach has been very provocative. That's why, actually, I mentioned earlier that our stepping stone has been the pragmatic BUs inside the telcos that were launching managed security services, because those guys had no time to waste on religious beliefs. They had to be extremely pragmatic. Our approach has been to design a piece of abstraction layer, okay, a piece of software that basically abstracts any language, any interface that you'd be using to reach XYZ device from XYZ vendor. Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. And the trick here is we did not want to go down the path. So I'm sure you've heard of NetConf or, typically, there again, we're trying to have a standard way of doing things, a standard data model that we're hoping the community will all comply to, and then suddenly life gets easier. Well, our thinking is, what's needed is not yet another standard, because we don't believe in standards. What we believe is, we need sort of like, I'm sorry, it sounds cheesy, but I keep making this analogy with MS-DOS in the computer industry in the late 70s. But MS-DOS is nothing standard, right? But it basically cuts the interaction between the higher level, the Windows and up, and basically the board and the chipsets and the memories and the processing capability that you have on a computer, right? Mm-hmm. And frankly speaking, that's not simple stuff. It's actually fairly complicated. It's just like 25 years or 30 years later, we feel it's very simple now because we get a computer for $500. But in reality, it's actually very complicated. Well, that's similar initiative where you would have an abstraction layer that is not standard, but sufficiently flexible to adapt to any given hardware, right?
Mm-hmm.
And provide a single interface to be consumed by any higher level application. That has not really happened in our networking industry. In our networking industry, we love silos. That's why we have integration issues, and that's why we have the OSS players. So our claim to fame is what? It's not like we've invented a God box or God software, or that we came up with yet a new protocol or new standard. No, we've designed a very, very smart piece of abstraction layer whereby any vendor or any telco or any engineer trained on the interface can onboard any box, any service in a matter of days, regardless of the language they use, regardless of the CLI, regardless of the API. It does not matter if you want it to be, NetConf, we have the adapter, it doesn't matter. But the disruptive, stake we're putting in the ground here is to say, guys, we're not saying that you push a button and it's clear because everybody has the same language. That's not what we've designed. But what we're saying, where we are disruptive, is if you were accustomed to call your favorite OSS vendor, and it took them 6 months to get your feature adapted, Mr. Telco, and God knows what price point. Well, where we're going to be disruptive is that, guess what? We're going to give you the keys. That's the DevOps trends, whereby you decide your own fate because you are the one literally, or your best integrator partner, developing and onboarding the boxes and the vendors you want and designing the service you want, first thing. And second, that thing happens in a matter of days. If I can do that, then I am absolutely disruptive to the entire industry. Disruptive, and that's what we've achieved.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, I mean, and again, I will say this. I mean, at least from the sounds of it, you guys are coming from a telecom background, which makes it a little more, I don't want to say believable, but it seems like at least you guys are used to working with operators and speak their language. And so being able to go to them, speaking their language, but bringing this new technology seems like it's a pretty good, at least inside track for you guys. I mean, I've talked to a lot of companies who come from the IT or data center space, great ideas, but I'm always concerned because they're coming from a world that is not telecom, and telecom speaks a different language. They have different requirements. I mean, they've got services that are collecting billions of dollars each day, and they're billing, and there's so much going on immediately for the telecom space that I'm always nervous when the IT guys start talking, about how they're going to revolutionize telecom, because telecom works pretty well. Obviously, there's advances that need to be made, but to go in there and disrupt that from that side is always kind of nervous. But it sounds like you guys at least, again, have that telecom background, so you can go to these guys and say, hey, we know what you're doing now. We know the models. We know what you need to do. Here's a way to perhaps improve that going forward without disrupting what you already have in place.
Yet again, music to my ears. And here's how I describe it. Look, the vision, this idea of this MS-DOS of the networking space, and actually I'm going to expand the networking space. I'm including security, and now I'm including Internet of Things, machine to machine, because anything going IP for me will be a device that can be consumed by that generic abstraction layer. Now, what do you need if, say, you want to build this so you have the vision, not rocket science. Okay, let's do this MS-DOS, right? And you say, okay, I'm going to, pile of money. I'm a big VC. I'm going to put a lot of money. What kind of talent do I need? Well, I'll tell you what kind of talent you need. If you miss one of the three, you're going nowhere. You need OSS engineering talent. You need IT engineering talent. And you need networking and security engineering talent. You need the three. Any piece missing, and God knows I'm speaking because we've suffered. Right? We've been around for 7 years. Among them, 5.5, 6, literally desert, where, vision, but nobody resonating. The momentum wasn't there. And literally, I mean, SDN and NFV was just fuel on the fire for us. But we've been through that journey of learning what does it mean to roll out 10,000 devices with our technology. Live, not a virtual CP in a lab or in a demo in a show. I'm talking about, the guy is going live and he's provisioning, the bad word, provisioning on the fly in parallel, hundreds of boxes per day. We went through that and we learned from it. And now, whether it's scalability, multi-thread provisioning, whether it's multi-tenancy, all those things that are pure telco issues, we master very well. Now, the beauty is you could have approached this two ways. We've seen a lot of innovation coming from the IT space over the past couple of decades, and then suddenly hitting the telco space. And I think this time, we're going to see something pretty interesting. I think we're going to see the stabilization of those orchestration technologies in the telecom space. And because, you know, M2Ms, which I think are happening, you know, just look at the, you know, all those, you know, the soft banks of the world and all those guys, you know, rolling out services based on sensors and so on and so forth. I think what we've learned here from stabilizing this orchestration technology in the telecom space is going to serve in a much expanded market, which is going to have the same needs and the same criteria to have this technology work. Let me give you an example. I'm just thinking of the automotive industry. I mean, now a car is basically, you know, an IT department now. Yeah. Well, the thing is, when I hear all those guys talking about Internet of Things, machine to machine, and whatnot, here's your thought. I mean, how expert are these guys on IT security? Let me challenge the community there through this video. Guess what? I'm gonna say something here. Even in the networking industry, right? Even in the networking industry, the security space is a standalone space with their own vendors, their own innovation center, primarily in Israel and California. And, you know, yes, you've got some big players owning a big security BU, but most of the innovation is coming from small companies, mid-sized companies from those two hotbeds. Actually, Asia is not that strong in that space. Mm-hmm. And guess what? They are very much silos. Yet, as we go Internet of Things, and we make all those sensors, IP sensors, and we interconnect everything, I mean, aren't we going to be confronted to the fact that we better master the art of firewalling? And how do you connect the dots? How do you orchestrate all of this in a single pane of glass experience? This is very, very different from what we've seen in cloud so far. Yeah. So I think it's going to start with mastering the art in the telecom space, where all those critical, capabilities you've highlighted are necessary. And then from that, we will expand to a much broader market space. So I'm with you. 3 components: OSS expertise, networking and security expertise, and IT expertise, because I mentioned DevOps. I mean, all that philosophy and that DNA of having designed something that could be customized on the fly by a community of engineers, that comes from the IT space. It comes from the IT space for the past decade. That's what we learned from there. And we're trying to put that in the OSS networking space, put it there, shake it a little bit, and get the technology out of there. That's what we did.